Good evening, everyone. What is it, Thursday? What's today's date? The 18th, June the 18th. So a couple things that I'll say here. Again, I intend for this to be interactive, so if you have questions, please let me know. Also, I might do kind of health checks in the middle. I get kind of distracted when I see people's faces, so I tend to hide the video to avoid that. So if I don't hear any feedback, I might just stop and say, hey, does this make sense, or is anything unclear? So you might hear me say that more often than you like, but that's why. So just to give some background on myself, my name is Michael Ford. I am a solutions architect with Red Hat, based in Chicago. I cover all of the central area. And the reason that I put this demo together is I come from primarily a networking background. And up until recently, a lot of the conversations that I was having with automation was around networking. But I think I'll always be a champion for networking. That's never going to go away. And networking is not going to go away, right? Whether you're talking about on-premise or cloud, we need to automate our network processes, and that's totally fine. What I was looking for was, hey, if I want to have more conversations around cloud and containers, let me set up a demonstration in order to do that. And I also wanted to make it kind of a practical demonstration, so not just, hey, can I spin up an instance? Can I do these little one-off things in the cloud? I don't think that's terribly difficult to do, but I wanted to show something that was practical and that clients might be taking advantage of and would find value in their everyday. So the reason that I have this slide up, and my intention is not to go through the slide deck at all, but if we're looking at Ansible, right, Ansible engine is great on the command line, but in my conversations, I tend to worry about what's happening in the enterprise, what our company's doing, the scale of automation, which is where we talked about Ansible Tower. And the biggest thing that I got was, hey, we want to use ServiceNow in order to kick off our jobs. And I was hearing that all the time, right? And I wanted to be able to talk about it, but I also wanted to be able to show it. And really, that's what I always want to do. I would always prefer to show something versus just tell you that something works and have you trust me, right? If you know me, if you trust me, that's great, but if you've met me for the first time, you want to see something, right? You're not just going to take my word for it. So let me show you something that works. Let me show you something that's practical. So with this, I wanted to make sure that we could take advantage of the API that's offered with Ansible Tower. We can call things programmatically. My goal is not to say that, hey, we can only use ServiceNow. We can absolutely do things with more than ServiceNow. I just developed this demonstration with ServiceNow because that's what a lot of my customers are using on an everyday basis. So ultimately, that's what drove this demonstration. And it started off relatively small. Right now, it works for AWS. What you'll see is at the end of this is I'm going to be building this out for cloud agnostic demonstrations as well. So I'm going to build the playbooks for GCP and Azure too. Today we're going to see this with AWS. So if we look at, let's say we want to come to ServiceNow. And ultimately we're going to look at playbooks and see how this runs as well. But I always think of who are the consumers of automation, right? And what should they be able to see? These are folks that may be technical experts. They may not be technical experts. And I want to cater to all levels of folks. So my goal is to have this be an interactive, this interface rather be something that's relatively simple. So if you're in a company, I'll use ServiceNow in some way, shape, or form on a regular basis. That's what you're accustomed to. And my goal here is let's see how we can spin up a number of RHEL instances with some basic attributes, some basic setup. And how do we make that easy to do in the cloud with a basic interface, right? So what we see here is there's a catalog item that I've got set up, and that catalog item is asking us, how many RHEL instances do you want? How big do you want them to be? So from the perspective of the end user, at the end of the day, there's stuff going on in the background in AWS, but they don't have to worry about that. It's more, let's make this as simple as possible. So let's come over to this option first. So I made this, the other thing I'll say too with this demonstration is more art of the possible. So these playbooks are not going to be production ready, but I want to actually show the functionality of what's happening. This works, and here's how you would do it. So as an end user, let's say I want to spin up 9 instances of RHEL. We want it to be, we all know it's T2 medium, but the end user may not know that, so we're just going to make it medium instances. That's all they care about. So I'm going to say 9 instances of size medium. And I'm going to click Order Now, and a couple things are going to happen, and we'll talk about that. So if I jump over to my Ansible Tower instance, I look at my jobs, we can see what's happened. And we'll go into each of these individual pieces in a little bit, but this is basically an Ansible Tower workflow that's going to do everything as far as ultimately spin up the underlying cloud resources, the instances, spin up a secrets engine via a container, do a bunch of things that we'll show. And you can see here I've passed in my variables from ServiceNow. So I've kicked off a job from ServiceNow. How many instances do I want? 9. I want medium-sized instances. This is a variable that is going to determine a couple things that we'll see in a second, but I've hard-coded this to say that it's coming from ServiceNow. So I can choose whether to run this from Ansible Tower directly, in which case this is going to be false. I've chosen to run this from ServiceNow, which means it's going to be true. Now the first thing that's going to happen in the middle of this demo is I've opened up a change request with this playbook that's running in the middle of this job template, and it's waiting for an approval. I've done more than set up a change request to wait for an approval. I've actually set this up so that the approvers are going to actually receive an email that says, hey, you have a new change request. Can you go in and approve this so we can proceed? In reality, this is where my art of the possible comes in. So in reality, I'm the only approver, so I'm the only person that gets sent an email. So let's go and check this out. So I have just an email that I've set up just for these purposes. And I can see here that I have a new change request approval. I get a link directly to that approval request. And I can see here, here's the change request that's been created. I can see it's been put in a state of waiting for an approval. I can see a description of what this is supposed to do. Ultimately, this will be cloud agnostic, but for now it's going to be just AWS. And what's going to happen is, because it's just me, right, I'm going to go in and act as the approvers. So I'm going to go in and approve this change request. It needs 2 approvers, so I'm going to put in an additional approval. It has been changed to scheduled, and if I go back to my workflow, I can see that this has now completed, and I'm going to proceed. So this is going to do a bunch of things in the middle. So ultimately what's happening with this particular workflow is a few things. Obviously I've got some error handling set up here as well. So if it fails for whatever reason, in certain processes I might do some teardowns to take everything back to square one. And that's what's happening here, where if I have any failures, I tear down all my resources, which in this case is a virtual private cloud. And every step of the way, if there's a failure, I will update the change request to say, hey, this is canceled, here's the reason why. But ultimately what's happening here is I'm going to deploy my resources, which in this case is going to be an AWS virtual private cloud and subnets and internet gateway and everything else networking related. I'm going to spin up the number of RHEL instances that I requested. In addition to that, I'm going to spin up one more instance, and that's going to be for the purposes of hosting just a Docker container for now. Again, so just some more background here, what's happening for myself. I'm in the process of picking up more Kubernetes and OpenShift. And you'll see, if you look at this demo in a month or two, you'll see that I'm going to continue to develop this a couple of ways. One, being cloud agnostic. 2, implementing this with Kubernetes and then with OpenShift. But for now, I'm just using a Docker container. So what's going to happen here, I'm just going to kind of talk through this as this proceeds, is I'm going to spin up in this case, it's ultimately going to be 10 instances, the first of which are going to be more for production. The 10th one is going to be hosting what's ultimately going to be a Docker container. Once that set of instances is sitting out in AWS, this is a team account, right? So there might be anywhere maybe from 1,000 to 2,000 instances. I'm actually going to use Ansible Tower to sync the inventory based on the tags that I've applied to my instances. Only pull out the 10 instances that I want into my Ansible Tower inventory. That 10th instance is actually going to have Docker Engine installed. And what I'm going to install on that Docker Engine is going to be HashiCorp Vault. So I want to also have a secrets engine that's going to host my secrets for all my users that are going to be added to my RHEL web servers. Once that completes, and I'll let this finish too, so we'll actually see this, but I'm going to do a few things, which is add some preset users to my 9 production instances, and also I'm going to add things like Apache, a dynamically generated web page that's going to be set up on here as well. So just some basic stuff, right? And the other things I'll do here is I'm going to register this with Red Hat Insights. I'm also going to run the subscription manager and register these instances to my account. Once everything completes here, I should get another email that says, hey, this has been successful, and then the change request will be closed out successfully. That's ultimately what's going to happen. It will take a little while, so I just wanted to make sure to kick this off and talk through it first. But let me ask right now, as I talk through this, are there any just initial questions on what's happening with this particular demo? Is everything clear? Obviously, there's other parts that have to happen as far as the integration with ServiceNow to call Ansible Tower programmatically. So let me stop and ask if there are any questions initially.
Hey, Michael, and this is not, I mean, this is good to see that. You mentioned some forward plans around provisioning Kubernetes, things like that. How far were you going to take that? Because we're also doing some stuff in the other space with advanced cluster management. There's doing that. So
I mean, honestly,
crossover.
I'm sorry, go ahead. So your question is how far am I going to take this?
Yeah.
So honestly, this is my, I'm kind of killing multiple birds with one stone here. As I go through the process of learning more Kubernetes, I'm going to start off with just changing this simple portion from a Docker engine to a Kubernetes deployment. And then ultimately what I'd like to do is change these 9 instances. So right now they're just EC2 instances. I want to change those to a Kubernetes cluster as well. And ultimately what I'd like to do is, right now this is just Apache, right, for the web server that for the application I'm deploying. I'd like to, wherever, as much as it makes sense, give a choice as to what application we want to deploy. If you choose a particular application, maybe choose whatever environment variables or whatever you want to make it more custom. Ultimately, this is still going to be a demonstration, so it's not going to be production ready. But to answer your question, this is my way of, number one, probably most important, is showing the value of migration and Tower to clients, but also it's more of a selfish benefit of having this be my pet project too. Did that answer your question? I didn't see who that was.
Yeah, it was John. Yep, thank you.
Anything else I can answer here?
So are you going to go into how you're actually making that call out of ServiceNow and into Tower? I mean, is your Tower instance out publicly accessible, or is that through like a mid server?
So this again goes to the art of the possible. My Tower is publicly available in AWS, not publicly available, but is out in the cloud. So it does take away some complexity as far as these are, as long as my security groups are open, right? ServiceNow, and this, by the way, is a ServiceNow developer instance. So yes, that does simplify things as far as from a network connectivity perspective. ServiceNow does not have any issues talking to my Ansible Tower instance. Obviously, if you're looking at something where Tower's on premise, you may want to have a mid server that's making those calls. I've not set that up for myself. That's probably going to be later in the process. I've gotten that question a few times. I'm going to be focusing more on what's happening in the cloud first, but ultimately, yes, I want to implement something more production ready.
Yeah, it is possible. I know we've got it. We're in the process of implementing something. Have gotten that part working. I think our biggest struggles is the data that we need pumped into some of our jobs is scattered across 50 different tables that are not related necessarily inside of ServiceNow.
Gotcha.
So,
Gotcha.
but it is possible to make that call through the mid server.
Yes, I've seen it done with consulting. I just haven't done it myself. So, if you're from a very basic perspective, so there are, admittedly, there's a few steps that I had to walk through. So I can do two things. I can kind of show you part of what's happening here, but ultimately I do have a blog entry on Ansible.com that kind of walks through some of these things. So I can, what I'll do is I'll pull this up first. Let's see here. Yeah, here we go. So, and I actually have to update this blog for Orlando, which is the most recent release, and I'm not getting that out. But this is the basics of what you need to do for having Ansible Tower be programmatically accessible, really by any third-party platform, but there's specific instructions here for ServiceNow. So this is ultimately making it's generating an, excuse me, ServiceNow is making a handshake call to Ansible Tower to generate an OAuth2 key. And that key is ultimately used to make a RESTful call. And that that API endpoint actually comes from Ansible Tower. I make that RESTful call. I have to make sure that I have the certificate, whether it's a self-signed certificate or obviously if you have some production, it's probably going to be through a CA. I have to set that up here as well. I have to set up a workflow engine in ServiceNow to actually call the script that's going to result from that RESTful API call. Ultimately, from that workflow engine, that's when I can create a catalog item, which I ultimately call from ServiceNow. So I can walk through those individual steps and show you that without a problem. But I'll also, actually I can log in the chat too. That's the blog entry that walks through most of these steps as well. With the caveat that this is from public ServiceNow to a cloud-based Ansible Tower. I don't know who asked that question, but do we want to go through the individual steps here of what I'm doing, or does that blog suffice for now? From a service.
Yeah, no, I think that answers kind of my high-level question on that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Let's see here. I want to make sure that we're almost done. I think that this part's going to take the longest as far as installing Apache and everything. So I want to make sure that we actually can close this loop so you can see everything that's happening. What I can show, actually, because Vault is completed, so what I can show is this. Another thing I need to do is get a little bit better at showing this data for the end user. Kind of hacky right now, but this is my host for Docker. And if I jump into Vault, I've given this a custom root token, super secure. And this just came from a variable list that's in my repository, and I'll show the repository as well. But the users that are getting added to all my RHEL machines set up here. And this is just, for now, this is just a static key. It's a private key that's being generated from AWS. So after this is all set up, I can log into any of my, actually, I think they're all here, so I should be able to log into any of my servers and verify that now too. So this is just, a development Vault image Docker hub that I've populated with a playbook with these basic users. And yes, there's Charter captains. Let's take a look here. So if I log into any one of these guys, actually the first thing I'm going to do just for verification purposes. Bear with me because I'm grabbing the commands. And let's grab the actual key itself. And I should be able to log into my RHEL instances. So I'm being prompted for a new password upon first login just because that's what my playbook did. And go ahead and log in via password. There we go. And other thing I was trying to do here was try to set it up via so that my users have no password privilege escalation. There we go. I wanted to just make sure I verified everything my playbook was supposed to do from a login perspective, so that's that. And the rest of this should be completed, at least I hope it is. Still a few things to do. See how far this is. Registering with Insights, so it shouldn't take too much longer. Great. Awesome. I have an email saying that things were successful. Here it is. And if I come over to the change request, it's been closed. Go to the closure information. Linux instances have been deployed successfully. And now, if I jump into any of my instances, of which there are, well, again, 10 total. Once again, I agree it's a little hacky for now. But if I log into any one of them, this is what I get. So just a dynamically generated HTML page showing kind of a timestamp here to show that this was, actually done on this date. It's farther ahead, right? So it's not the right time. It's not the right time zone, but it's there, and just kind of showing here that we're pulling in the actual Ansible host, also where you can find this code. So this is everything that's been done with this workflow. Deployed everything from a pod resources perspective, opened up a change request, deployed my instances, updated my inventory and tower, installed Docker on the 10th, and installed HashiCorp Vault, populated the credentials there. installed Apache, did some basic setup, registered with Insight. So if you want to verify that, we can, but I'll hold off for now. And then closed out the change request and sent an email that said we completed everything. So let me stop one more time and ask, are there any questions on anything that was done? I'm going to show the repository here shortly, but let me stop and ask about the demo itself.
Hey, Michael, it's John. Just trying to calibrate my own head for each step in the workflow. And again, still coming up to speed somewhat on the tower piece of Ansible. For each one of those nodes in the workflow, is that actually triggering off an individual playbook? Looked like it was. I think
so each one of these guys are job templates. So I have to create the job templates before I make a workflow. And I apologize. I think because of this audience, I just kind of make the assumption.
No worries.
I know what I want to talk about.
I got what you're saying now. Thanks.
And the reason I do this is I want to make things modular, and also when I talk to clients about this, I usually talk about the fact that from a networking perspective, the networking team may own this. They may not want the Linux team messing around in here because they have different sets of expertise. So you can own what you're in charge of, where you're the domain expert, but also put things together so you can get things done from start to finish. And then you couple that with something like this, and all of a sudden, everything is basically locked down so that a person who is not a domain expert, who is not a domain expert anywhere, can implement everything and do what they need to. So let's say, for example, this is some common ephemeral workload that you want to get spun up on a regular basis, and you don't want to have to worry about approving it. In my case, I'll set up an approval, but if it's something that's well tested, it works, you might want to give this ability to the end user to do what they need to, and they simply have to just put in option A, option B, click order now, and then they've got what they need. So if we look at everything happening underneath, these are all the playbooks that are running. So each of those individual boxes is a job template that actually walks through one of these playbooks. Now this started off as an AWS-only repository, so I have some playbooks that are AWS-specific that I'm probably going to move because they're not being used as part of this demo. So for example, all these MySQL guys, they're not being used as part of this demonstration anymore. That was part of an earlier iteration of this demo, and they'll probably move. Now, from a documentation perspective, actually, you know what? I can take a look at this very quickly. We can kind of see what's happening here. So this is the first playbook that I actually ran. Everything's encrypted with Ansible Vault, so my credentials are here but encrypted. And I'm just using the Snow Record module to create the change request, put in the short description. And these are hard-coded, right? So deploy rel instances in the assignment group. Obviously, if you want to have something for production, you may change this, you may not. I looked up the states in ServiceNow to find out what was required for the actual state for the change request. And then I'm just, in my case, and not even saying that this is the best way to do things, but I'm simply putting in, wait, retry 50 times, query the change request to make sure that it's in the correct state. Then it's been approved, delay 10 seconds between tries. So it gives me some time so I don't have to approve things immediately, right? That's what's happening underneath. So that's just one example of a playbook. I put this here so I knew what I was doing, right, because I couldn't remember all these states off the top of my head. But that's just one example of these playbooks. And what I've started to do, and this is not a completed project, my goal is to, and Josh talked about stealing this, I'm going to give it away, right? So I do this demo for customers often, but I want to make sure that people can do this for themselves too, because I think for me, it's a great learning process, and I would like to make sure that customers, if they want to try it out themselves, they can. And so I'm starting to document this, kind of talk about, hey, what we're doing. This is the next step. So right now, this is the Docker container. I'm going to change this to Kubernetes, so that's my first step. Ultimately, this will change to Kubernetes as well, but I'm just taking this one step at a time. So just kind of showing you, here's what you can expect to get out of this demonstration, showing kind of the workflow that you'll be using as part of this demonstration. talking about the fact that end users can be using something as simple as ServiceNow in order to kick this off. And then I'm going through the individual steps here to say, here are the variables that you need, here are the job templates you need to set up, here's the workflow, everything you need to do. Some of these are completed, some of them are not, but I'm going to document this so that people can use this too and do it for themselves. So let me stop there and ask one more time, just another health check to see any questions and if this made sense, and hopefully this is valuable, but that's the demonstration in and of itself. Happy to answer any additional questions, but I wanted to make sure to walk through this first.
And are you for the updates into ServiceNow? So when you go back in and update the change request or do whatever, are you using the ServiceNow modules that are out there? I think I saw a chunk of using the modules out of the collection there. Yeah, I saw it at the top. So I was curious if you're using that or if you're making API, URI calls into ServiceNow. For stuff we're doing, possible. We needed URI, but that was like special case type.
Yeah, I think for the most part, I'm actually using the Snow Record module. So let's see, update change request.
But you're using one out of a collection. You're not using like the built-in from 2.9 and earlier. That's a collection straight out of Galaxy, so like the latest version.
Right. So that's how ServiceNow is starting to deliver their modules, and that's honestly how Ansible is going to change to deliver. Yep. So whether you're looking at Ansible Galaxy, whether you're looking at Automation Hub for customers, I know Palo Alto is doing the same thing. I have a Palo Alto demo that's pretty comprehensive as well. Palo Alto is delivering their modules via a collection in Galaxy. So,
ServiceNow actually has one that they're actually maintaining and supporting out there. It's not just the community one. Because I think there was a community one in older versions of Ansible, but it wasn't great. It wasn't as robust as it probably could have been.
Gotcha. No, this one I believe is actually from ServiceNow.
Just from them. That's cool. Okay. Did not realize there was one. So.
Yeah. So there's one for Snow Record. I think there's one for query one. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Yeah. So this one, I know the change request. So the other thing that I'm doing here, I didn't talk about this. I create this artifact. This artifact is created as part of the first job template in the workflow, and that artifact is getting passed. Well, I say that artifact basically, and that artifact is getting passed from workflow template to workflow template. So I basically call this later on in my subsequent playbook. So I have the change request number saved so that I can reference it when I need to. So I don't have to query for it. I have the change request number as this variable, and then I can change it to, here's the state. So I'm just using the Snow Record module to change that state. Anything else? And before I forget, I'm going to drop this into the chat as well. And you'll see me updating this on a regular basis. That's my my immediate goal, is to get this documented in its current iteration to make sure people can replicate this for themselves. But that's it as far as the official demo goes. Hopefully everything made sense. Happy to answer any additional questions. Again, this is just something that I've been showing customers to give them a more practical use case for deploying RHEL workloads, especially deploying well-known ephemeral workloads via an interface that their end users are more accustomed to. It's been pretty well received, and I want to make this available for my peers and other people to do.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think having it out there and documented just to see an example, because in theory it's, whatever you can get a form on ServiceNow side to pump data in, you could pump that over to Ansible and make those calls, to do that. And so like we're looking at it from a perspective of we can the hope is that we don't, eventually the help desk doesn't have to try to go into our tower instance and fire things off. We can work through approvals, let people approve stuff on their own, and it kicks off a job. And unless somebody has to manually intervene, nobody ever has to leave ServiceNow, which a lot of the users are already working there, interacting there. So pretty helpful.
That was exactly the driver for this demo. Ansible Tower is awesome, but that's just one more thing that people have to learn. And if I can take that away from them, they have to learn that. Then
yeah, if they don't have to log in and if they don't have to log in and
right.
find the template and remember how to fill in the survey, if they can just
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of that stuff is already in a ServiceNow form that somebody already created a while ago.
Right.
It's drop downs or whatever. So when you store, when you store that change request number, are you writing that into a YAML that then sits on the tower instance, or does that just live as the workflow is out there and active? It just lives within the workflow, or I guess how is that?
It's in the tower instance, so I have a Jinja template that actually populates a new generated file for that particular change request. And at any point in time, I think I do it. I know I do it at the end. I need to make sure that it's doing it in the middle if I fail in the middle. But I can guarantee you at the end, it deletes that artifact, so it's not just hanging out there.
Okay, very cool.
Anything else? Questions I can answer? Well, Josh, I think that's it. Unless you have anything else you wanted to add, we can stop the recording.